So I recently made a video about quitting caffeine, and the initial results of that experiment were good. Until I tried to repeat the experiment. And then things started to go really, really wrong. I finished the last video saying that I wanted to try a low histamine diet. I don't know anything about histamine intolerance or low histamine diets or anything like that, so I needed to do some research. During the preliminary stages of that research, whilst I was just sort of trying to get an overview of the topic, I noticed that there were so many conflicting opinions on it, and nobody actually seemed to be able to agree on a definite course of action, or even a definite cause of the histamine intolerance, or even definite foods that you shouldn't eat. But I'll explain more about that in another video. There were, however, some common themes that were coming through in this histamine intolerance stuff, and they were SIBO and stress. Since stress is like the low-hanging fruit, in theory it's the easier thing to deal with, I thought I would go and tackle that first and just implement some strategies that would help me to feel less stressed. And as part of that, I decided to quit caffeine for a second time because I know that it can stimulate the central nervous system, so in theory, no caffeine means less excitement, less stimulation of the central nervous system, and so hopefully less stress. And this is where things started to go wrong. Usually my food intolerances mean that things travel through me quickly, like too quickly. And I think I mentioned in the previous video on caffeine that my habits had changed, and they had, and they were actually looking quite normal, which I was pleased about during that first experiment. But the second time that I tried to give up caffeine, I actually found that things went in the complete opposite direction. So, in other words, if things were previously going through me too quickly, now they weren't going through me at all. Like, I started to experience this extreme stagnancy, shall we say. And at this point, I don't know if I had or have SIBO because I haven't taken any tests for anything like that. But what I do know is that stagnancy is definitely a recipe for it. And like, some of the effects that I experienced in this stagnation were way worse than anything that I was experiencing before. Usually I just have to worry about where the nearest toilet is. But now I have these feelings of being like overwhelmingly full, and I can feel a pressure building up inside as though like energy, or there's like an outward pushing force. I can also feel what the Chinese would refer to as ascending qi. So I can feel an energy rising, and sometimes that is literally accompanied by an eruption. And actually at one point this feeling of ascending energy got so bad that it started creating a lot of heat and pressure in my head, and it just felt like my head was trying to explode. My eyes went really bloodshot and I ended up getting a sty. And the brain fog, my god, the brain fog is just like next level. Way worse than anything I experienced when I used to eat a lot of sugar. And in fact, actually, aside from the pressure in my head and thinking that my head was going to explode, the brain fog for me is probably one of the worst things because I don't have a physical or manual job, so most of the things that I do in my life involve using my brain. I tried to like ride this out because I was thinking, well, if I just go back to drinking caffeine, I'm going to stress myself out again. It really became too much, particularly with the brain fog and the feelings of pressure in my head, like that was going to explode. And I also know that when, in Chinese medicine, when symptoms kind of turn into heat, then like you're really heading for a bad time. So I thought, okay, we've got to do something about this. So I tried to reintroduce black tea to help with motility, and that had little to no effect. So now I kind of feel like I'm in this catch-22 situation. Like, I quit the coffee to lower the stress, but now the effects of no coffee are causing more stress. And in fact, I think the stress from having no coffee is actually worse than the stress from drinking coffee. I think this is something that's true of food intolerances in general. We avoid certain problematic foods to lower the toxicity or lower the stress on the body, but then we get stressed because we can't eat the foods that we like, and it's also really, really, really stressful trying to avoid the foods that are actually problematic. So just a word of warning. If you do quit caffeine, you may experience some motility issues. So the plan at the moment is to just continue working on lowering stress and to also implement things that can help me with gut motility. and just get this migrating motor complex working again. At the moment, I really need to prioritize this idea of efficient elimination so that I'm not just adding to my problems by having everything stagnate in there. Since stress seems to play such a big part in these digestive issues, if I were to go on a low histamine diet now, that would just create more stress because I would end up having to remove yet more foods from my diet. Again, I don't really think that that will be helpful at this particular moment in time. When everything gets moving again and I'm feeling a bit less stressed, then I will evaluate where I am and see if a low histamine diet is necessary. And I say necessary because I think from what I've seen that histamine intolerance is actually a symptom and it's not necessarily the problem itself. I'd much rather do some digging and find out the root cause and go for that rather than just tackling one symptom after another. And I feel that when you go on elimination diets or when you start removing foods that appear to be problematic, it's just like putting a plaster over the wound. It's not really addressing the underlying issue, it's just managing the symptoms. And in the meantime, if anybody has any suggestions for increasing gut motility, then I would love to hear them.